Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the December 2024 edition of Framing the Future, a program sponsored by the Maryland Forestry Foundation. My name is Gary Allen. I'm the president of the foundation. I want to welcome all of you to this program. It's a unique and exciting program, one that we feel is a really fantastic follow-up to the program that we offered last month when we talked about a land ethic with the Leopold Foundation, Aldo Leopold Foundation, and their land ethic approach to helping people frame an ethical approach to land development in the future and the preservation of natural features on it. The question we get most frequently is how do you go about that at the local level? How do you apply something like a land ethic? And the best example that the foundation's come across is a program called Conservation by Design. It's not to be confused with other people who use the same phrase. This is about planning and zoning. And we're going to be looking at some experts who've been working on this program and its implementation in Pennsylvania and ultimately with a Maryland respondent. I want to welcome you today. And for the details of today's program, let me turn it over to our moderator, Megan Carr. Megan is an urban forester from in Baltimore City and one of our very first Mel Fellows. Megan, take it away.
All right, thank you, Gary. Looking forward to today's discussion. As Gary alluded to, last month's entry was a really wonderful meeting with a representative from the Aldo Leopold Foundation. If you missed that discussion, would like to go back and view that or any of our other previous webinars, just go over to the Maryland Forestry Foundation website. That's marylandforestryfoundation.org, and click on webinars. You can view the entire back catalog. And if you don't receive our regular emails announcing the upcoming webinar, you can enter your contact information in a very brief form, and we will keep you updated as to our future installments. For today's webinar, however, we will go ahead and start moving in that direction. I will make a couple of other brief housekeeping notes, primarily just to say that if you have questions for our speakers today, we encourage those, and please enter those into the Q&A function. You'll find that in an option at the bottom of your Zoom window or screen. We will address those at the end of today's session. I will read those aloud so that folks viewing the webinar at a future date will know the subject of those discussion points. Without further ado, we will move on forward into our primary presentation from Ann Hutchinson. Ann Hutchinson, FAICP, works as a land use planner at Natural Lands, one of the nation's oldest and largest land conservancies. With planner Randall Arendt, she created the Pennsylvania statewide growth management program Growing Greener, Conservation by Design, an approach that embraces the concept that conservation can coexist with development. She has been a champion for conservation planning techniques, now more than ever relevant to addressing climate change and conserving natural resources. Prior to joining Natural Lands, Ms. Hutchinson was the planning director at Lower Merion Township, a first-ring suburb of Philadelphia and the first Pennsylvania community to adopt conservation design regulations. She holds a BA from Northwestern University and a master's degree in landscape architecture from SUNY Syracuse. So thank you for joining us today, Ann.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for your time. I know municipal officials are engrossed in budgets and year-end hearings, so thanks. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. And you should be seeing a presentation. So I work for Natural Lands, a nonprofit land conservancy in Pennsylvania. We've been around a long time. We were founded in 1953. And our motto is Land for Life. We preserve and care for open spaces in eastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey, Salem and Cumberland County, New Jersey. And it's also very important to us that there are opportunities for people to discover nature as well. We were founded by an unlikely founder. Alston Jenkins was an accountant And his wife said he needed to get out of the house at some point, and he joined a birding club and discovered that a large property now called Hines Wildlife Refuge by the Philadelphia airport was going to be filled with dredge spoils from the Delaware River. And it was a magnificent wetlands in the era before wetlands were protected by federal legislation. So Alston arm wrestled his friends a bit, and they bought this marsh, which fortunately was seen as worthless land, and turned it over to the Army Corps. And eventually he decided that he wanted a nonprofit, Natural Lands, to hold land. So we own over 23,000 acres in a series of preserves that are open to the public. This is the city of Philadelphia in gray, and Maryland is down here. So the nearest preserve to you is our Peacedale Preserve. We also hold conservation easements on over 25,000 acres. So those traditional, I call them bucks and acres, land trust activities of holding land and holding easements are a big part of what my organization does. But there's also a group of us, me and about a dozen others, who work with municipalities in furthering their own conservation goals through land use regulations, zoning codes, through plans, trail plans, master park plans, and we also help them write grant applications to buy land. I feel pretty lucky because an early mentor in my career was a man named Michael Clark. Sadly, Michael passed away in 2020. Michael was the president of Natural Lands from 1988 to 1997. He was both a forester and a planner who had studied at the University of Pennsylvania and worked for the famous landscape architect Ian McHarg. And by the time he took the helm at Natural Lands, the Philadelphia region was seeing an acre an hour developed, incredible development pressures. And Michael was pretty pragmatic, and he said, you are never going to keep pace with development unless you do more than just buy land. You can never buy as much as you want to see preserved. And he recommended that those municipal decision makers are pretty critical to what happens to land. They make decisions on whether they're purchasing land in their community, and they make decisions about land use regulations. Because on any dark and starry Monday through Thursday night in Pennsylvania, there are 2,560 municipalities. We're a commonwealth who have control over their own zoning and land use. In many ways, you're lucky to be in Maryland, where there is stronger county assistance and authority over land use. While we work with communities often and help them buy land, in this picture, the shades of dark green are parks or land that is too wet and steep to develop. And maybe the medium green is land that's already protected, conservation easements, or the white is land that's already developed, and this medium green is land unprotected. If I put a Post-it note on this map, my Post-it note is 130 acres. So because I'm originally a liberal arts major, I'm going to make the math easy. If you pay $20,000 an acre for land, the Post-it note costs $2.6 million. Maybe if you're lucky, your community has enough funding to apply for grants, leverage a little of their own money, and buy some land. But I doubt you're going to meet your conservation goals solely by buying land and relying on generous landowners. In 1991, Michael Clark and me separately, working for a township, discovered the work of a planner named Randall Arendt. Randall joined the Peace Corps, the first round of the Peace Corps. He was originally sent to Panama Americans were asked to leave Panama, and he went to Jamaica, where he said he learned planning from British Peace Corps volunteers. He got a planning degree at the University of Edinburgh and worked in England for 6 years. And when he came back to New England, he was appalled, as he said the landscape looked like a dog's breakfast. Sprawl had overrun the area. Says he didn't invent cluster. We think that the planner Holly White really came up with the idea for cluster. But Randall turned it on its tail and had the development follow rather than lead the identification of networks of open space. So Randall really perfected what I call conservation subdivision design. At the same time, in the early 1990s, the state of Pennsylvania had their first funding program to acquire open space. Within a year, they discovered they had 12 times the number of applications they could fund. They turned to Natural Lands and asked, what else can we do? It's not enough to have however much money they had to buy land. And this approach that Randall developed, called growing greener or conservation subdivision design, really resonated with them. And from about 2007 to 2014, it was a formal partnership. We continue that work under funding from both the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and a private family foundation called the William Penn Foundation, and funding from individual municipal clients. Now, you can look at comprehensive plan after comprehensive plan, and they all talk about preserving whatever is valuable in their community, farmland or forest or scenic views. Yet, while we like to complain about developers, a developer following all the local rules may have no choice but to convert a beautiful landscape like this into a wall-to-wall pattern of houses, streets, and lawns. We have only ourselves to blame. Subdivision regulations and zoning regulations are the DNA that implements a comprehensive plan. I've never read a comprehensive plan, and in my career, I've read over 150. I've never seen one that says it's our community's goal to convert the entire landscape into houses, streets, and lawns. Yet we adopt rules that prescribe just that. On this plan, you know, if you live here on Mirror Pond Walk, if you're lucky enough to own this lot, you can enjoy all that beautiful view of the pond. If you live here, you can jump up and down. But mostly, you would never know there's a pond on Mirror Pond Walk. So we need to change the rules. And our approach to changing the rules is to avoid a taking. Pennsylvania is very much a private property rights state. So we're allowing the developer the same number of residential units he could normally get, but shrink the footprint a little, make those lots more compact, and in the process, set aside a network of open space. Because really, the reserve at Springton Woods shouldn't be named after the very features it destroyed. We start with a community's comprehensive plan. Ideally, that's a larger county or regional plan that identifies open space networks. And parcel by parcel, as development occurs, you're filling out that plan. And hopefully, for properties that are too fragile to see any development at all, the community is buying or placing conservation easements on that land. We write into the rules a 4-step design process that when I first met Randall, I said, it's sort of landscape architecture 101. And he said, it is, but the engineers who draw the plans don't know it. So in a typical 2-acre or 1-acre conventional zoning district, your subdivision plan might look like this. Now, I hope that in the communities where you all are, you net out or subtract land that is very steep or wet. Wetlands and floodplains should not, and very steep slopes over 25%, do not count toward developable land. So maybe this is a 50-acre site and you get 30-acre lots because 12 acres are unbuildable. So the remaining is developed. Step one of the 4-step process is identifying those primary conservation lands, floodplains, wetlands, steep slopes. Many communities already discount that anyway. But the things people really miss when development occurs are high quality forests, specimen trees like this great oak, a scenic view, a farmhouse. And we think it's important to consider more than the unbuildable land. So in requiring open space, we require all of the primary open space and half of what remains. We also require that you get out there, boots on the ground, and visit a property. Planning Commission members are the right group to complete this task. As long as I've looked at two-dimensional paper plans, I never fail to be surprised, good and bad, when I actually see a building site. Whether it's a vernal pool, a magnificent forest, an old stone wall, or a scenic view, there's no substitute for a walk around a site. After that walk and after looking at the data the applicant submits on existing features, you identify the open space, which again is all of the unbuildable wetlands, floodplain, and steep slope, and half of the other land or features. That means that the most fragile sections of the property are somewhat buffered, and also that the open space is usable by more than mountain goats, that people can actually use the open space. Step 2 is locating houses. Step 3 is working in roads and trails and stormwater management systems. And the final and least important step is drawing in the lot lines. Both of these subdivisions have the same number of homes. The subdivision on the left has about 900 linear feet less roadway, even though these homes are what we call single loaded. The homes are close together, but they're on only one side of the street, and everyone has a view over the open space. You've also kept people's backyards out of this very steep stream valley. And again, remember that you're trying to connect this to a larger community open space network. When developers tell me I'm crazy, that's not how you develop land, I point out, think about golf courses. When a golf course community is developed, the first thing that's done is a very well-paid golf course designer is paid to design the open space. After that, the developer shows as many homes as he can with great views over the golf course. Then he puts in the road and golf course paths, stormwater ponds, and last but not least, the lot lines are drawn. So in working at a land conservancy, I'm telling communities to build a lot more golf course developments, but really leave out the golf course and substitute woodlands and marshes and whatever features are important to the community and identified in their comprehensive or open space plans. We know, and many of you know even better than I do, how critical trees are for keeping pollutants out of the water. Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia suburbs are often very wooded, and it is nearly always our goal, not always, to preserve woodlands on site. We do sometimes see meadows and grasslands as well. I've worked in the past with the Stroud Water Research Center in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and they've published many papers, one in the Journal of Water Resources in, I think, 2020, on the benefits of trees to not only preserving, but they've even have data that shows they improve water quality. So you're trying to avoid an unhealthy stream on the left, and healthy streams like the one on the right are shallow, have broad edges, tree cover canopy. The leaf mulch is excellent for water quality. It was also a surprise to me to know that if you have a 30-foot vegetated buffer, while you're removing 65% of the sediment, unfortunately, what's left are fine silts and clay. And if you fish, those fine silts clog the gills of fish. And if this is a drinking water source, you're going to have to treat it with alum, which is expensive. So if you can keep a forested buffer of 100 feet, or ideally even more, you're going to do a much better job at removing sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Steep slopes, especially wooded slopes, are critical to conserve. And we also advocate in subdivision regulations for street trees between the sidewalk and curb. I'll show you a few examples of what's actually been built and on the ground with this basic premise of building the same number of homes, but all of the unbuildable land and half of the good land is set aside as protected open space. This is a subdivision in northern Chester County, Pennsylvania, near the Downingtown exit of the Pennsylvania Turnpike. It's actually 3 subdivisions that connect. From an early adopter of these land use regulations in about 1993. Took a little longer for the developer to build it. This township's goal is to preserve woodlands. There weren't much on this property, but there is a property next door that's fully wooded. So the woodlands you see here might normally have been taken down due to development. You're looking at these 3 homes at the end of this subdivision. And as you can see, the homes look like every other suburban subdivision home. We make sure the numbers work. I led focus groups with developers who said, hey, I can build the same house on a 3/4 acre lot that I build on a 2-acre lot. As long as you're not taking my value away, because they make money selling homes, you won't get sued. And we have not seen any litigation in the 30 years that these codes have taken place. These developments are connected with a series of trails. The township originally had a master trail plan. This lot protected a historic barn. This is another example where they combine development options. This is Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, an area that has a lot of horse farms, as I know many parts of Maryland do. And the landowner in this original farmstead wanted to be able to preserve a farmstead on what's about an entire 45-acre tract. So he put 11 or 12 acres in one conservancy lot. It's pretty wooded anyway. It preserved the farm complex, kept the historic home in its original setting, and he sold the rest to a developer. This is 1 home per 2 acres, but instead of every lot being 2 acres, the homes are on 1 acre and the rest is open space. This area has no public water and no sewer. This is the original horse farm, preserved, as were the woods. And this is the section that the developer marketed. These homes are exceptionally large. He actually built a few less because of impervious cover limits. Those are the homes. We require management plans for the open space. This is now a native warm season grass meadow. This picture's was taken in 2019, right before the sort of pandemic shutdown. So it has grown in and doesn't look quite as raw as it did originally. This is another option for communities looking to accommodate higher density near a major road intersection, near a train station, although not as dense as many of the Maryland, DC suburbs. This was a community that is very rural. The subdivision I just showed you is here. And they very much want to preserve wooded stream corridors and some scenic views across meadows. However, Route 100, which is one of two of the highest volume roadways in the county, and Route 401, which on traffic volume is third or fourth, is at this corner of the community. And they really weren't allowing for attached housing units. So after many developers came and went, a developer came along with a concept that combined traditional neighborhood design or new urbanism with conservation design. We were in the process of rewriting their zoning code anyway, and this development follows our model for village development. I can get it too. This is the tract, which is about 300 acres. And this is the site. Originally, this area at the intersection of the two busy roads was zoned light industrial for warehouses. This was all zoned for single-family homes. And the community said, we really want an edge. We want a limit, a transition between more intensive development at two major road intersections and our beautiful rural community beyond. So after many late night hearings that I wouldn't want to repeat, this is the plan that eventually got approved and built. So this farm is preserved on a very large conservancy lot with open space. 65% of this site, in addition to unbuildable land, is open space. And hand in glove in these wooded stream tributaries are a series of houses on small lots, a little larger lots at the edge, townhouses, and a commercial center. The Chester County Public Library branch opened here, a new branch. The development was started around 1999, but it's only in the past 3 years that the market was strong enough for the commercial center to follow. It looks like this. Porches, homes close to the road, a series of sidewalks, tree lawns. We also feel it's very important in these standards that you not only have large contiguous woodlands preserved, you're looking at the woodlands in the distance, all preserved, but that there's also a little internal open space. We say about 3% of a village should be these internal greens, and you're looking at one now, and the homes face the green. There's a homeowners association that owns and manages most of the open space, although the township decided to take title and the developer did donate some of the land. You're looking at these townhouses and they face this village green, not across a road, but directly. This is the public library, and it is heartening to me that when I travel here, there isn't a day that I don't see kids on bikes going to the library. And these are the very new, you can still see the silt fence, mixed use buildings that are first floor retail and second floor apartments. There is one pad site. You can't be in Pennsylvania and not have a Wawa in your development. There's also a series of bike trails, and you're looking at the spray irrigation fields. There is no public sewer in this part of the county, so this is served by a land application system. This conservation design technique is also very useful when historic preservation and stormwater mitigation is a goal. This development, which won several awards for the Montgomery County, Pennsylvania Planning Commission, preserved historic resources. This was a farm listed on the National Register. It had been in a Quaker family. The original members were signers of the Declaration of Independence, and the descendants eventually sold the 44-acre property. This is in Lower Merion Township, where I was the planning director. It adjoins the city of Philadelphia, a series of first-ring suburbs flanked by St. Joseph's University, Haverford College, Bryn Mawr College, and at the other end, Villanova University. At 44 acres, this was one of the last big estates to be developed. Residents cherished an old open field. While the open field is most developable, there just weren't many left. And these buildings were by a Quaker architect, William Price, and the goal was to save those buildings. The conservation subdivision plan saved those historic buildings. Many were greatly augmented, saved part of this open field. There's a subsurface stormwater system, saved the woodlands, and preserved this stream corridor that connects to other preserved land. In our Department of Environmental Protection lists conservation design as a non-structural BMP. This is that corner meadow on the left-hand side of the screen with an underground stormwater infiltration system, ever more important as we get more severe storms. And these are berms in a very mature woodlands. In 1995, when they were putting these berms in, I was very concerned that the forest would be too impacted and the trees would die. But this is still there 30 years later, and the trees are still there. Not quite 30 years. This is one of the barns repurposed into a home. One of my favorite examples of conservation design is one I'll end on. I think this tool is best when the local zoning code is combined with land preservation. London Grove Township is in the far reach of southern Chester County. I think the postal district is Avondale. It's near the Delaware border. In 2003, this township had enough subdivision applications to double their population. Why did that happen? Well, this is US Highway 1. They had actually extended public sewer south of Route 1 and hadn't looked at their zoning first. So by 2003, as all these subdivisions had started to fill in, they were extremely concerned. It wasn't quite too late. So if you pay attention to this area, this is how the land use ordinances played out. These are 3 conservation subdivisions. This was one tract, and we worked closely with the developer because he was the first to come in under their regulations. Our goal was to preserve these wooded stream corridors. Now, this is the heart of the mushroom industry. Chester County, Pennsylvania grows more mushrooms than any place else in the United States. Historically, the forests were cleared to grow hay, which they used as compost in the mushroom houses. So this farmer, though, had chosen over the years to retain these wooded stream corridors. This farmer had mowed to the edge of the creek, so 2 properties. Now, when this came in, true confession, I really tried to shorten this cul-de-sac and put more units up north. You could on a big high plateau, but at some point in negotiations, you can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. So there are a couple more homes here than I would like to see, but you do in all cases have more than 100 feet from the edge of the stream to the lot line. So this is the subdivision that resulted from their new conservation subdivision regulations. The township again has a trail plan and the developments are connected with trails. And the homes look like any other suburban home you see. This is this trail connecting the 2 subdivisions. This shows you the first parcel where the farmer left the trees along the stream, the riparian buffer. And this shows this area where the farmer was mowing down to the stream. Now, the codes require a management plan for that open space. So this developer had to plant additional trees. Natural Lands would have required 5-foot tree tubes, but we didn't catch that. The township didn't quite require it. 15 years later, the trees look like this. And the township is creating a greenway along this open space and gradually filling in the open area and making it more wooded. But the bigger picture is my colleague Jack Stufferud worked with them and they adopt a local referendum which passed, which allocated some revenue for open space, which they matched with state and county funding. So this is the first conservation subdivision. There were 44 acres of this property. And in 2008 or 9, when this subdivision was approved, the township had no public park. And late one night, the developer was asking for approval. He still had some engineering issues to resolve. And the elected supervisors said, well, you can keep coming back until every condition is satisfied, or maybe you don't need that 44 acres and you can sell it to us for $1 and you and the engineer can work through that checklist. And that's exactly what happened. This 35 acres is a longer story and presentation, but it was donated by a developer who built a golf course, unrelated to conservation design. This 6 acres the township bought, fair market value, paid full price. My colleague Jack met Mr. Goddard, who donated 40 acres, an incredibly generous soul who passed away a few years ago, and they named the park after him. And the Goodwin family couldn't afford to donate all their land, but they sold it at half price, a bargain sale. And the township used that match money against other grants. So this township was pretty excited that they've preserved over 100 acres and really only had to pay fair market value for 6 acres. This is a park they built, retaining forests on the land the original developer donated. And we followed the conservation subdivision codes. We followed the first 15 that were adopted. And we know that on average, each time a property is developed, we're lightening the footprint of development by about 62%. So to me, this is a technique that as we see more severe storms and the need to mitigate climate change, it's a more important tool as a growth management tool when development occurs. So I thank you for your time this holiday season, and I think we'll hear from Debbie, and I'm happy to answer questions. And I will stop sharing.
Great. Thank you very much, Anne, for a really great comprehensive overview. And we wanted to make sure that we, of course, provide a Maryland perspective as a Maryland-based webinar series. So we're very grateful to Debbie Herr Cornwall for providing some input on the Maryland side. As a licensed landscape architect, Debbie has worked in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors over the past 30 years. Drawing on her experiences working in a multidisciplinary design firm and as a sole practitioner, she has designed and constructed environmentally sensitive projects for private and government clients. Prior to coming to the Maryland Department of Planning in 2017, she worked for 9 years at the county government level, assisting citizens in navigating the development review and approval process, preserving agricultural lands, and developing local policies. Debbie currently serves as manager of the Natural and Working Lands Unit in the Research, Review, and Policy Division of MDP. And I will turn it over to Debbie.
Thanks, Megan. Good afternoon, and thank you, Anne, for your presentation. I really loved the concept of designing but leaving out the golf course, because that's really something that anyone can easily visualize. What I'd like to share today are some of the regulations, policies, and tools that are available in Maryland that help guide development as well as the preservation and conservation of land. And while local jurisdictions in Maryland adopt their own planning and zoning ordinances, there are some regulatory requirements to help guide development, such as Maryland's Forest Conservation Act and the Critical Area Program. The intent of the Forest Conservation Act was to minimize the loss of forest resources during development, with forests in sensitive areas such as the streams and wetlands that Anne's talked about a lot this afternoon, identified and protected as part of the planning process. With the approval of development plans can include the long-term protection of these identified areas or additional plantings, and ultimately guide development away from forested and sensitive areas. Maryland's Critical Area Program covers all of the lands within 1,000 feet of our tidal waters and tidal wetlands, so that includes the Chesapeake Bay, the Atlantic coastal bays, and their tidal tributaries. The Critical Area Program is in our state statute and is implemented at the local level. While there's standard language in our state regulations, the local jurisdictions can make modifications with the approval of the Critical Area Commission, and those modifications can be specific to their needs, so adapting their zoning ordinance to fit what they would like to see developed. Building and construction activities are subject to limits on lot coverage and clearing in the critical area. And there's also additional regulations for activities within the critical area buffer. And the buffer is that land that is immediately adjacent to those tidal waters, tidal wetlands, and those tributary streams. And it's at least a minimum of 100 feet and can be expanded in areas that have steep slopes and sensitive soils. The buffer has stricter requirements or regulations than the 1,000-foot critical area, since it's essential for water quality and habitat. And generally, construction and land disturbance, such as clearing of trees and grading, are prohibited in the buffer. So in addition to these regulatory programs, Maryland also has strong conservation programs. Created in 1977, MALF, the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, was one of the first in the United States and has become one of the nation's leaders in agricultural land preservation. MALF purchases agricultural easements that forever restrict development on prime farmland and woodland, with one of the goals being limiting the suburban sprawl. Across the state, MALF has preserved over 2,600 farms, totaling more than 350,000 acres of land. MALF is a partnership with local governments that administer their own local programs. The local governments develop their own ranking systems and approve easement applications that are submitted to MALF. MALF's mission includes curbing the expansion of random urban development, protecting agricultural land and woodland as open space, protecting wildlife habitat, and enhancing environmental quality. Maryland also has a rural legacy program that provides funding to preserve large contiguous tracts of land and to enhance natural resource, agricultural, forestry, and environmental protection. while supporting a sustainable land base for natural resource-based industries. The program focuses on creating green belts around Maryland's communities and preserving countryside. It encourages local governments and land trusts to work together to identify these rural legacy areas that are delineated areas within a county that include both working farms and ecologically sensitive landscapes, and to apply together for annual funding. Since it was enacted in 1997, the Rural Legacy Program has preserved over 124,000 acres of valuable farmland, forest, and natural areas. So the tools and programs that I've highlighted today are just a few of the many available that can be used with the concepts Ann's presented in the Conservation by Design program. And using the wide array of available tools allow the local jurisdictions to guide development of their communities. And one other item that I'd like to share today is a tool that Maryland Department of Planning created in coordination with Maryland Department of Natural Resources Forest Service, and it's the Forestry Guidance to Local Governments. That document has two main goals. It's to help local officials become familiar with the many facets of forestry and the Maryland state laws and regulations that govern it, and to provide examples of how local planning and zoning can accommodate the different aspects of forestry, thereby making local officials more familiar with forestry practices in their jurisdictions and streamlining that permit process. And I'll share links with all of these programs as well as our forestry guidance document in the chat. And I thank you for the opportunity today to share this information with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Debbie. So looking at the Q&A chat right now, we don't currently have any open questions. So I'll certainly encourage folks in our audience to enter those questions, anything that you would like our speakers to address today. But in the meantime, Gary, I know that you had some points of discussion that you want to make sure you had
Well,
a
as
chance
I
to
said
go
in the
over.
beginning, I'm extremely excited about this program. I think it really dovetails with so much of what the foundation's about in terms of providing support and encouragement for the preservation of forest resources across Maryland. And so let me start out by asking Ann a couple questions in response to Deborah's comments. First, Ann, in almost the next to the last slide that you provided us today, you mentioned a ordinance that had been drafted or adopted by a local government to implement conservation by design in their jurisdiction. It would be very helpful, I think, if at some point, as a follow-up to this program, and if possible, even in the chat, if you can share with us or tell us how we might acquire copies of that draft ordinance or the ordinance that was actually adopted. So many local governments are looking for a template with which to advance their own planning and zoning resources and provide the context within which to apply ideas like the one you've been describing today. Having said that, let me ask you a specific question. You provided a wonderful set of examples, and yet I must notice, Deborah, in my experience, and I was a local government official here in Prince George's County, Maryland, we have not seen a lot of enthusiasm by the development community for options such as conservation by design. So my comment to both of you, and either one of you or both can respond, is what kind of resistance or challenges have you faced in trying to advance an idea like this one? In other words, what kind of objections have you seen raised to it? Is it proven to be, for example, in too costly to some developers? That is, they feel they lost too much in the space available for subdivisions or space. Obviously, we're trying to set aside space and do it. But my point is, what kind of challenges have you had to implementing this, and why are some developers in so many parts of our state so reluctant to embrace these ideas? What do they feel that they've lost?
Well, I'll comment on a couple of things. First of all, um, I defer to the state of Maryland that has much stronger environmental regulations than Pennsylvania, and a much stronger ability to use transfer of development rights, because you can transfer within a county. In Pennsylvania, unless you go through a complicated multi-municipal plan and shared ordinances, TDR doesn't work very well. It works in Lancaster County, but you have higher densities and small municipalities. Um, uh, I find developers are law-abiding citizens and they follow the local rules. So it's the resistance, the important player is not the developer, it's the municipal official who has to have the leadership to adopt a change in the rules. I will say I had strong resistance. I've been doing this since I started working here. I had strong resistance in the early 1990s. It was a new technique. But clustering, which is not as conservation focused as this, has been around forever. And homes on lots that are less than 2 acres are perfectly marketable now. And I would observe it's not the developer that's the problem.
Okay.
It's a municipal official taking the time and having the vision and leadership to change the local rules.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I'm always happy to share our model ordinance. It would need to be aligned with Maryland state legislation.
Amen.
My office now has a highly secure SharePoint system, so I can't just share a link and anyone can get to it. If they want to email me, I will email them. I'd be happy to email it to the hosts here and you can share it. But I warn you, it was reviewed by the Pennsylvania Governor's Policy Office, and you may have an ability to do even better with it because you have better as far as environmental protection you have better environmental regs in Maryland.
Please share it with us. And Deborah, same comment, and that is, what kind of resistance have you seen through the Maryland Office of Planning to ideas like the one that Ann's described today?
I don't know that I can speak to resistance per se. And I think Ann's point about the local jurisdictions providing the framework and the ability for different types of development to happen is well taken. Oftentimes it's the capacity at the local level that, going through the process of a comprehensive rezoning, rewriting your ordinances is very time consuming. And oftentimes local jurisdictions, it could be a capacity of staff, it could be a capacity of funding to hire a consultant to help with that. And then I think it's an educational opportunity as well, that the elected officials may not be aware of the different types of development that they could actually be looking for to include in their communities. So I think there's opportunity. So I think that's definitely something that that folks will be receptive to, but we may need to make it a little easier. The model ordinance, just like our critical area program, we have model ordinances for the local adoption of their critical area programs. So as far as the forest conservation as well. So it's I think we need to make it easier for people, and that would help.
Well, let me do one follow-up question in light of my own personal interests and having served on the Climate Commission here in Prince George's County as one of my other hats that I've worn. I can't help but think that the implications of these conservation design strategies have significant impact on climate planning, which is so much on the minds of so many local officials these days, where local jurisdictions are developing kind of county by county in Maryland climate action plans. Do you have any experience, or has that issue about the relationship of this design approach in planning and zoning come up in respect to climate planning at the local level and reducing greenhouse gas emissions or runoff or saving energy? Have you seen a connection between these ideas that you've shared today and some of the emerging ideas about sustainable planning and climate action?
Well, we're in Pennsylvania, we're only recently seen townships and boroughs develop their local climate action plans. Counties have a little bit of a head start on that. There's definitely a link, and in our work with the program, we're trying to, at least in our messaging, strengthen that link. Natural Lands has also recently published a stewardship handbook online that talks about native plant materials, at least appropriate to Pennsylvania. I think pretty applicable in Maryland, and how you care for and plan for managing natural areas. You have a great forestry organization who can do that. So yes, there's a link. I don't know that I can claim it's energy reduction because you're still developing land. It does, though, leave spaces to infiltrate stormwater. So where severe storms are involved, it's critical. And it can save large blocks of contiguous forest, which conventional subdivision can't do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Deborah, do you want to comment on the climate connection with this idea?
Again, I think there's opportunities there. Things we are just, I think, just starting to address those types of issues through our planning processes. So whether it's green infrastructure plans, incorporating resiliency into all of our plans or our comprehensive plans. And so it is, I think there is an opportunity again to incorporate those types of concepts into our planning and zoning that is going to benefit the bigger picture. So it also addresses all of these issues that we've been talking about, definitely have impact on climate and can assist us in meeting our greenhouse gas goals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Megan, those were my questions. Have we gotten any others? And do you have any yourself?
Great. Yeah, we have a few questions in the chat. I'm going to combine two from Janet. So in the sense of, making sense to cluster the homes and saving open space. First, how do you ensure that that land that's set aside for open space doesn't become infill development such that the built development takes over the whole area? And second, who controls what goes into that open space so that if folks want tennis courts and ball fields versus natural spaces like forests and meadows?
It's a great question. In our model ordinance, we require that the land is placed under conservation easement. Municipalities can hold easements, as can land conservancies. There have been a few instances where an easement wasn't practical. It was a rather rural community, farther out in the Poconos. And in that case, we did have a deed restriction, which I normally don't recommend, but that restriction is also placed on the recorded plan. We require in the ordinances that management plan for the open space is set forth. So there's discussion about whether that land will be usually retained as woodlands, or if it's a meadow, if it's going to be lawn or warm season meadow or something else. And the ordinance does limit the amount of that open space pretty severely that can be impervious, like a tennis court.
Great, and we are right at 2 o'clock. We do have one final question that might be a big topic, but I'll go ahead and propose it if we have a kind of a short version and might be an interesting topic for a future webinar. How can these ideas be used for transit-oriented development in urban areas while saving urban forest remnants?
Well, I hope that your valuable forest remnants are not coexisting with transit. If they are, they should be purchased in their entirety and preserved. Because I don't know how to develop at the 8 to 12 units per acre that's appropriate for transit-oriented development and save forest. So I think that is you want your very high density development to be maybe near but not on valuable natural features. There's a story from the Woodlands in Houston, which Ian McHarg, the famous landscape architect, designed. I'm not remembering the corporation that hired him, but the first phase he designed, and he put the homes on the bad soil and he left the good soil. Houston's wet and soggy and floods all the time. And that was built. The next two phases, they didn't involve Ian, and someone else did the planning and built those next two phases. And during the hurricane, there's so many hurricanes, I've forgotten the name, that was so devastating to Houston. The first phase came out fine because those good soils were left to absorb the rainwater. There's a group of students at the University of Pennsylvania, I think, studying that. So transit-oriented development is even denser, but there's a lot more in the planning thought that goes into it.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're just a little bit past 2 o'clock. So I'll be mindful of folks' time and just thank our speakers and turn it over to Gary to close us out.
Well, I want to thank both of you again for your participation today. And I want to encourage all of their viewers today and those who might see the program subsequently to independently follow up on this idea of conservation by design. It's an idea that needs to be more widely shared, more widely adopted. And frankly, we want to encourage both. We'll be looking to provide a better education in this program in cooperation with others in the future, particularly the Sustainable Maryland program here in Maryland. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope all of you have a wondrous holiday season and stay healthy and travel safe. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Framing the Future. Take care.
Thank you.